I learned when, I had this rock bottom in college that whenever you go within yourself and you're open and you have that courage to explore who you are and look at the aspects of yourself that you're afraid to look at,
Mm.
when you go within yourself, you start noticing how the external world is a direct reflection of that inner work or inner world that you're dealing with.
There goes a sight from my soul. Welcome to the Inspired Evolution. And it is an inspired evolution today. We have with us Emilio Ortiz. Emilio, how are you there, brother?
What's up, brother? Thank you so much. I love that yell in the beginning. I didn't tell you this before we were recording, but I've actually been listening to your show for a
Ah,
minute. So it's really cool to, this is a special moment. And thank you for inviting me. Thank you for finding me. And I'm happy to have a incredible conversation with you.
oh, brother bear, that means the world to me. Like I know you've got your own show, and yeah, guys, please do check out. You'll find me saying this throughout the podcast. Please do go check out Emilio's YouTube channel. He's having amazing conversations with amazing thought leaders from all over the world. For those that are tuning into him for the first time, he considers himself a Gen Z wisdom seeker, but he's a podcaster. And dude, honestly, he is here to bring together young leaders to help them uncover their inner genius, their gifts, their passions, so they can lead from what I would call a place of heart. He does it with a lot of grace, a lot of humility, and it's really beautiful to witness, man. Really easy to get behind what you're sharing with the world, and yeah, just on what you were saying, it's really touching to hear you say that, because I don't know what it's like for you, but I look at the metrics and all the stuff in the back end of the podcast, and sure, there are people listening in, yeah, but I forget, like I try not to get too
Mm,
involved and obsessed with that, and just sort of have the conversations and sort of see what they do for the world.
yeah.
But anytime someone goes, "Oh, I listen to your podcast," and I turn into like their fanboy, I find every time they do, I was like, "Oh my god, you listen!" Like, "Oh, thank
Uh-huh.
you!" Like, yeah, it's a real trip to just feel into
Mm.
people tuning into the podcast. How did you come to podcasting, man? Let's start there. What was going on in your world? Because I know I shared with you a little bit earlier. I was in a pretty rickety place when I came to podcasting.
Mm.
Yourself, what was your call to podcasting?
It was a whole journey, man. I mean,
Mm,
I feel that right now, collectively, as we both know, there's this huge awakening of consciousness going on.
mm,
And it doesn't matter what age you are, it doesn't matter what background you come from. I believe that everyone is going to experience awakening in the next
yeah.
few years. And, I was lucky enough that it came at a very early age for me. I'm 23 right now, but
Mm,
the whole journey really started during my freshman year of college when I was about 19.
mhm.
And I'm from Colombia. I grew up in the US, but I finished high school in my home country in Colombia. And
Yeah.
there was a lot of party culture over here, a lot of drinking, a lot of
Mm,
that fun side of things that can also
mhm,
turn toxic if you're not careful.
mhm,
And when I graduated, I decided that I wanted to study abroad. And I had always thought in the back of my mind, like, I'm going to go back to the US. That's where I should be right now.
mm,
For some reason, there was something inside me calling me to go elsewhere, not look into the US. Like, I had applied to like 15 universities, 14 of them were in the US. One
mm,
of them was in Europe.
mm,
And you know, for some reason, I just felt this like inner pull towards Europe. I
mm.
already knew the United States energy, and I knew kind of like how the college experience could go over there.
Yeah.
But I wanted to explore even more. So I get to Europe. I actually ended up going to Madrid, Spain,
Nice.
one of the most beautiful cities in the world.
Yeah,
And when I
definitely.
was there, um, I basically, what I was living through in Colombia, like the party aspect and the alcohol and the chasing girls at nightclubs and,
Mm,
the not taking care of myself, probably multiplied by about 10. So it got pretty
Yeah.
bad. Like the, it got pretty crazy. Those last, those first couple of months in
Mm,
college, I was trying to make the adjustment. You know, living on my own, and I think that happens to a lot of us when we first leave our like cocoon, our house, our home,
the nest,
the
yeah, right.
nest. We go out and like we're trying to also find a new identity for ourselves, and I
Mm,
thought that it was going to fulfill me to be this party boy persona that goes out to every nightclub. You're always going to see him there. He's
mm,
always going to have a 1 liter Grey Goose bottle at his table with all his
mm,
friends,
mm,
and he's just going to be constantly pursuing girls
mm,
everywhere. And a couple months into that, my health and my mostly mental health, also
yeah,
physical health, but started to
mm,
take a toll. And I was in a residence, like a sort of dorm, living on
mm.
my own, and I was constantly surrounded by other people in my freshman year, and like the days I wanted to rest, I would get
Mm.
a knock at 11 p.m. at night. Hey, we're going out, and I couldn't say no.
It's
I
a
just
real
couldn't
pain
say
when
no.
partying becomes your job. I remember having this moment in my life when I was like, man, when did partying become my job? Like this is meant to be fun, but please continue as you were saying.
Yeah, yeah. It literally became like this routine.
Yeah.
And Madrid, the thing with that city, and it's very special, is that there's always something going on
Mm.
every single night. So it could be a
Yeah.
Monday, it could be a Wednesday, it could be a Sunday. There is literally something going on, and you're gonna get pulled into that environment if you don't learn to have boundaries, to
Mm.
say no. And I didn't have those. So like I would say about 7 months into it, I had barely passed my first semester, in terms of academics and
Mm.
classes and things like that. The second semester, I started off even, with more of a bang in the party side. And right before final exams of the second semester, I kind of like, I was like, let me see how I'm doing with my grades. I hadn't even checked. I didn't even know, where I was at. Like, hey,
Mm.
final exams are coming up. Um, you know, we were only, allowed to go to 70% of our classes. So
Mm.
we could miss 30%. And I would use those 30%. I would
Yeah,
like
yeah, yeah, yeah.
max
There's a
out on my
quota. Yeah, right,
absences.
right. Yeah.
I would max out on them because like some classes I had at 11 in the morning. And
Mm.
let's say I got back from partying in Spain and in Europe in general, it's like you're back at 6 in the morning. And
Mm.
I just wasn't a person the next day to
Yeah.
be
Be
able
able to
to
get to
concentrate and
class. Yeah.
focus. Um, so during that time, I really started to feel like the chronic stress building up and like the
Mm.
fatigue of going out, not giving my body enough rest and time to recuperate. So
Mm.
I checked my grades and I went through the 7 introductory courses. I was studying business administration, and I looked and I said, wow, I'm not going to pass more than half of these classes. Like,
Mm.
there's no way. There's
Just
no way
based
I'm
on
going to pass.
attendance. Yeah, right.
Based on attendance, based on how much I knew what was
Yeah.
going on in that class,
Yeah.
based on like the midterm exams and things like that. So I was like, all right, huge wake up call. The stress started to build up so much that I called my parents one day and I said, I'm feeling really sick. Now it became physical, like it
Mm.
started manifesting as mental, a little bit
Mm.
emotional, and then it became physical. Just I couldn't get out of bed. It was like this fatigue.
Mm.
Some people would call it chronic fatigue. I don't know really what was going on with my body, but it was in disorder. It was in chaos. um, so I was given, of course, the typical antibiotics that they give you when you go to the doctor.
Yeah.
And just like they prescribe you whatever so that symptoms can be like numbed out, but they don't go
Mm.
to the root cause. And around that time, it got so bad that my parents said, hey, we're pulling you out of the residence. You're going to go live with your uncles. I
Yeah,
had
right.
family in Spain. So
Mm.
I was with them for a while, and it was almost as if like a miracle happened. My mom called me one day. She said, I just booked a flight to Madrid from Colombia, which
Mhm.
those flights are expensive. Like they take special occasions, and if my
Yeah.
mom like she felt like I think that motherly intuition that was like, hey, I need to go check up on my kid,
Yeah.
and she came, and I got really lucky because I told you that I grew up in the U.S. So I grew up in California, And while we were there, my mom had her own spiritual awakening. She started going down the path of Kundalini yoga, sound healing, and all these like modalities. And she was always like listening to tapes, like Wayne Dyer, like people like
Mm.
that.
Yeah.
But I was only 16 when she was going through all of that, and I had it in my house. I
Yeah,
would
in the
always
in the
see her.
peripheries. Yeah, yeah,
It
yeah,
was
yeah, yeah.
there,
Yeah.
but I wasn't really ready to look at it. I was
Yeah.
not even curious at all. Like, what are you reading? Or I
Yeah.
just, blocked it out. And, but around this time when she came to visit, I was vulnerable enough that I asked her, like, she would always say, meditation, meditation,
Mm.
meditation. Uh, and right before she came, I was actually scared that she would see me like this broken. So
Mm.
I started to turn to like the gods of Google search, and I was
Yeah.
like, um, and it started off as like more of like an ego centered question, but I
Mm.
started asking questions around like, why are highly successful people so freaking successful? Like,
Mm.
why is someone like Elon Musk or someone like Bill Gates, why can they create massive multi-billion-dollar companies
Mm.
and have time for all this shit? Like, I can't even go to class and I'm 20 years old. Like, what's
Yeah.
going on?
Yeah.
And I started going through YouTube videos, I started going through articles, I started like coming across certain books, and I kind of studied also a little bit like the stories of these highly successful people. Like,
Mm.
people I see you have, like, very faintly I can see Tim Ferriss,
Mm.
the Tools of Titans. I got
Yeah.
that book, and I was like really studying these high performers and what do
Mm.
they do. And I started deducting that there was a pattern, and most of these people, one, they're lifelong learners, they're avid learners, they
Mm.
read constantly, they're devouring information and always coming into things with an open mind.
Mm-hmm.
And two, they have a practice or a discipline to train their mind. And in this
Right.
case, I started hearing the buzzword meditation, meditation,
Mm.
meditation. So when my mom got to Madrid, one of the first things I told her was, Mom, I need you to teach me how to
Let's
meditate.
talk meditation. Yeah,
Yeah.
nice, nice, nice.
And she, opened up her toolkit to me.
Mm.
She knew so much about the subject, especially after being, trained as this yoga instructor.
Mm.
She had been doing it for now more than like, at that point, more than like 5 or 6 years.
Mm.
So she had a lot of experience teaching the subject as well. It
Mm.
wasn't just like, I meditate, but I wouldn't feel capable to tell someone how to do it.
Mm-hmm.
So she had that skill set. That's why I said that it almost felt like a miracle, because it was exactly what I needed,
At that
and it was
time.
coming from one of the people that were closest to me
And that would be
in my
most,
life.
yeah, yeah. There's the ease with which to access that information based on
Yeah,
that context. Yeah,
yeah,
man. Yeah.
yeah. So I kind of went through like a detour in your question about the podcasting, but
Mm.
it really ties into, I started to really come across podcasts on YouTube.
Mm.
I didn't know that they were called podcasts. I was like listening to interviews, like people
Yeah.
like Impact Theory, Tom Bilyeu,
Mm.
Aubrey Marcus. I started tuning into conversations with leaders, game
Mm.
changers, um, you know, authors, and people that have built successful lives for themselves and
Mm.
can drop wisdom whenever you want
Yeah.
to. Like,
Yeah.
it's available at your fingertip. It's
Yeah.
always gonna be there. That's something that we don't realize. Like,
Mm.
you want some, like, just drops of wisdom that if you're feeling lost,
Mm.
you can find that. And you can find that on YouTube, but you can also find it within yourself.
Mm.
Um, and during that time, I just started devouring podcasts like a mad person. It was,
Mm.
a bit like exaggerated, because when you're starting this spiritual awakening consciousness, like, you just want to know everything about the
Mm.
world. You just
Mhm.
constantly are questioning the world around you, and within you. And during that time, I always had a seed in my head that I wanted to make an impact
Mm.
to my generation, because I had been, fucking up so much for so long.
Mm.
And I knew that so many people my age were going through the same thing. It's crazy when you start this journey of like awakening, and
Mm.
you're talking with someone, and you kind of like know, like, like, I wish they had this like little nugget of wisdom that I read in that book,
Mm.
or but at that point I didn't feel that I could explain it to them. I was still kind of in like the spiritual closet with my friends and people around me. I didn't want anyone to know like I was reading Neil Donald Walsh. Like those books are
Yeah.
intense. So I didn't really, know how to communicate to people around me about what was going through my
Mm.
head and my life. And it really helped. And you kind of said this but when we started recording, was
Mm.
that you start meeting people in your journey that have similar paths as you and have similar missions and similar interests.
Yeah.
So as my energy changed, I started attracting new people into my life, and naturally other people left.
Mm.
And one person I started meeting was a friend that from university, and he was friends with my roommates, and he came over to our house because after that, after the dorm, we had an apartment, so with like 4 friends, and he would be coming over, and one day like he just walked in my room and he saw the books that I had in there and that I
Mm.
was reading, and he's like, "Yo, do you like to read?" And I was like, "Fuck yeah!" I mean, you can definitely see that I like to read. And he's like, "Bro, me too." And then we started exchanging books from there,
Mm.
him and I. And as the friendship progressed, we were always like talking about ideas, like how can we get this to our friends? How can we get this to our
Mm.
university? How can we start building this? And it was really funny because there was this conference. We were in Madrid. There was this conference in London
Mm.
called the Health Optimization Summit. And it was during the summer that he sent me like a sponsored Instagram post from this conference. And
Mm.
he's like, "Yo, we should go. Like, we need to go."
Mm.
And, I looked at the price. I'm like, that's kind of expensive. Like, I
Mm.
don't even know how to pitch this to my parents. Like,
Mm.
I don't have any money right now.
Mm.
And he's like, "Bro, we need to make it happen. We need to make it happen." We literally wrote a letter to my university, like the dean of the department, and we're
Yeah.
like, "Can you sponsor this trip for us?"
Yeah. Yeah.
And we described like all the reasons why, like the
Mm.
reputation of the university,
Mm.
and they didn't end up saying yes, but it
Mm.
was that like, you know, as soon as you start having ideas and you
Mhm.
start taking action on your ideas and you
Mhm.
start getting out of your comfort zone, things start to
Yeah.
move in your life. We had
Big time.
this guest, John Asaraf, on the podcast,
Mm.
and he said there's no law of attraction without action.
Totally.
And I started learning these things about like, okay, I can have all the quotes and little Instagram captions that I want in my head, but if I'm not doing anything with that, then what's the point?
Yeah.
And when we got back from that conference, we were filled with inspiration. So I really resonate with being inspired is a frequency. Being inspired is a whole different frequency
Mm.
that when you tap into it, it kind of moves you in its own direction when you're moved by inspiration. And we were moved by this dream, by this inspiration. That's when we started a podcast together.
Mm.
Eventually things in the future progressed. I ended up going my own way and
Mhm.
continued the podcast, and that's where we are now. This is the 3rd podcast that I start, but
Yo.
each one, it's been like you learn something new, and you
Yeah.
learn to kind of value your own time and your own ideas.
Mm.
And it gives you a lot of liberation knowing that you're creating for yourself and bringing that energy to other people.
Yeah.
If I was having conversations with the intention of like, oh, I know my mom would be proud of me for having this conversation, then it wouldn't be the same intention. It's like, first I want to like nourish my soul,
Fill
and
up
when
your
my
own
soul
cup.
is nourished,
Yeah.
people will get will feel that. And if I'm having a conversation on the show that I don't want to have, I can't even imagine that it hasn't
People would
happened
want to
yet.
tune in. Yeah. Yeah.
It just wouldn't be the energy signature that I would want to be putting out in the world. So
Yeah.
yeah, long answer to your question.
Nah, I
I'm sorry
truly
about
appreciate
that,
it. I
but-
truly appreciate it. Please don't apologize at all, ever, bro. There is so much in there. there is so much in there. I really appreciate you taking the time to share so openly and so abundantly, brother. The the piece where you just left off, like, yeah, I think it's really intriguing to sort of, I'll frame it this way. One of my really good friends, he would always say that he's a massive introvert. Like I'm like extrovert to the max, right? Like I just
Mhm.
everything's outwards. I just really love, that's how I recharge, hanging out, doing the podcast. Like I
Yeah.
told you before, it's 8 a.m. and I'm zinging now that I get to connect with you, right? So I'm
Uh-huh.
massive extrovert, touchwood. But he is introverted. And one of the things he said for him, and I found this so beautiful, he said he really knows when he's onto something good because there's like this inner nudge which goes, oh my God, I got to share that with X, Y, and Z, or I've got to share that with A, B, and C, or I've got to share that with C, D, and E, you know?
Mhm.
And as soon as that sort of like nudge comes in, yes, he goes and shares it, but he often takes a minute just to sort of stop and go, ah, I really love this thing. Like, I really love this thing. And
Mhm.
I found, and the way he described that to me, because I think when you're extroverted and you're outwards facing, you're always kind of like, yeah, things are just happening and tumbling over themselves all the time anyway.
Yeah.
But for him to be like, oh, I want to face outwards with this because I'm so inward facing generally, was like this real clear sort of, what are the things that we express and we create and we put out in the world? And, I feel a real kinship to what you shared because, you
Mhm.
know, I've been through a journey where mindfulness and meditation was completely what revolutionized my life. Struggled with 6 years of depression, and that was not pretty. Let's put it that way. Put it lightly. But getting through that, that brought me to this massive amount of self awareness, and through cultivated meditation and mindfulness, and now through that journey, after a while, you learn so much that it almost becomes, I don't know how, like, I can hear it almost echoed by you, but I'm putting words in your mouth. Like, there's a moral obligation almost to, like, oh my God, like all this stuff, like,
Bring it out. Yeah.
check it out. Like, come on, please. Like, let's evolve together. Like, and one of the things, and I'd love to get your thoughts on this, because feeling into your background, like, we've, I've been, like, I've got a history of going out partying, doing my own thing as well. I always felt like in this like evolution, like one of the things that inspires me, it makes no sense to anybody, but I'll try to emphasize with you, is I always felt like I was the dead weight. That, like, if I'm inspired to evolve, like if I could change, anyone can change. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's like, if looking
Mhm.
back at where I've been and where things are going, if I could do this, I know you can do this, yeah. So it's
Yeah.
like almost
Yeah.
like I was the last one to that would have been the last one to change, and yet here I am changing. It gives me a lot of confidence in the collective that we're currently in, that you referred to at the beginning, that there is a shift that is undergoing. Tell me a little bit about your journey with expression and like coming through to actually share the podcast, because I know you told us how you got there, but it's not something which is just like, oh yeah, like, especially, man, like, it was hard enough for me at the age of, I think it was 26 when the podcast started, 27. And by that time, I'd gone through my adolescent journey and I'd sort of like cemented a bit of my identity in terms of, okay, like, that was
Mhm.
me then, and I'm going somewhere now. I'm open, inspired to evolving, but sharing
Mhm.
your expression when you're in such a formative state,
Yeah.
like, yeah, it takes courage, right? Can you tell us a little bit about
Mhm.
that?
Yeah. And courage has become one of my biggest values,
Mm.
recently. And I realized that, you know, as we're going to see so many of the old paradigms break down in the next coming years, I think
Mm.
it's really helpful to take on this attitude that your identity is fluid.
Mm.
Once we like really base ourselves into this one identity and, surrounded by just a couple labels around it, um, that's when, we're more resistant to this change. And, coming from this identity of being the party guy and, the one
Mm.
that can outdrink all of his friends and things like that. And, flirt with all the girls, like things like that, to now the identity that I've kind of been building on myself through what I'm learning and through even this show has literally been a vehicle for me to showcase my transformation
Mm.
with the world. And
Yeah.
in terms of the expression, I came from a society that's very constricted in what you can say and what you can't say.
Mm.
And, you always have these beliefs in your head, like, if I start to think different than what my friends think, then I'm going to be ostracized and I'm going to be picked on and I'm going to be bullied. And I've literally gone through very, you know, deep experiences regarding not feeling that I fit in to
Mm.
where I am. I've always come from a family through my dad's job that we were moving around a lot. And moving from the US to Colombia at 16 was a huge leap.
Mm.
And I actually, had to kind of refine who I was and
Yeah.
kind of change something, suppress something so that it could actually like fit in more with the
The
group and the
culture. Yeah,
people
yeah,
around
yeah.
me.
Yeah.
And when I went off to Madrid, like, it was the same process again. So I was used to this process of like, okay, now who am I? Now,
Yeah.
how can my identity
The
kind of fit
slipperiness
into
of
where I
identity.
am?
Yeah, 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 yeah. Allowing it to move. Yeah, yeah.
Uh-huh. It's like, now who can I be? Like, who do I want to create? And I decided in the beginning that I wanted to be this party guy again, and
Mm.
this like sort of like athlete that doesn't go to classes and things like that you see in movies. It was like literally ingrained in the back of my head, and the Disney movies that we watch when we're young. It's like, oh, that's the guy that's going to get respected, that's the guy that's going to get
Mm.
validation, that's the guy that's going to get acceptance from everyone around him. So,
Mm.
and I realized that when I did become that person, it wasn't fulfilling me at all, and it actually was
Mm.
detrimental to my health in a holistic level.
Yeah.
And when I met my friend, his name is Alvaro. We started the podcast together, so it was really good to have a person by my side that was going through the same
Mm.
insecurities.
Yeah.
Like, bro, like, if we're about to release this podcast, you know what that means. Like, people are gonna start talking and people are
Mm.
gonna say things about us, and it's like, yeah, but we're in this together, right?
Mm.
So it wasn't a huge like punch in the face,
Yeah.
humiliation type of thing, because I feel like what we were doing, and what I'm still doing, and what I think we're both doing, it comes from this heart-centered space that if you're showing up as your authentic and true self with what you're doing in the world, there shouldn't be any fear of holding back your expression.
Mm.
And when we like, I literally have to share this story that when
Mm.
the day we released the podcast, we were in pandemic. So we actually started the show, the first show, during lockdown. And I was living with my ex-girlfriend, my girlfriend at the time, and she was also very supportive in that, like, having someone or surrounding yourself with people that know that you're meant to be doing this, or like this is something that gives you passion, gives you happiness, and you shouldn't really give a shit about what other people might say, because it's all in the
Mm.
mind as well. Like, there's been very few people, and I don't really receive like hate comments on things, because
Mm.
it's like, and even if there is something related to that, it's just like, I don't want to project, and I know that maybe that person is projecting
Mm.
an insecurity or a frightened aspect of their personality to me.
Mm.
uh so I actually bought a bottle of wine the day that we
Mm.
were going to release the episode,
Mm.
and I drank the whole bottle
Mm.
because I was really nervous. So
Yeah.
I say this now, like, yeah, don't, it doesn't matter what people think, and
Mm.
you can express yourself, but when you're in the trenches, it's like, holy shit, it's scary.
It is.
And you start learning that the more you do it,
Mm.
right, the more write an authentic caption, or you get on your Instagram stories and say something, then the less that fear feels real, because it's an
Mm.
illusion.
Yeah.
And I've kind of just been in this battle of like, on my T-shirt, if for people that are on YouTube, it says "Press Publish."
Yeah.
This is a brand created by some YouTubers, actually,
Mm.
Colin and Samir, and I've been learning so much from them. And this mantra of just press publish, like,
Mm.
if you want to share it, press publish. Like,
Yeah.
we always, we have what we want to share in our hand,
Mm.
and it's there and it's our gift to share with the world, but it's this like inner voice that's like, you shouldn't do that, you
Yeah,
shouldn't
yeah,
do that, you
yeah.
shouldn't do that.
Yeah, yeah. The head
But it's
gets in the way
like
of the heart.
getting past that.
Mm.
It's getting past that voice that,
Yeah.
magic starts to happen, because when you share things authentically,
Mm.
these types of conversations and connections and opportunities come about, and it's a beautiful thing.
Boom. Okay, so this is where I was hoping to ask you a question that was really pertinent for me, and I can't let you go today without having this chat with you. So, in our culture, and I know this might turn into a bit of a bro masculinity chat, but at the risk of that, honoring everything,
Let's do it.
um, I personally have found, having coached quite a few people now going through the journey and also reflecting on my own journey, that we as a society, I'm just gonna say, could do better with regards to rites of passages. Yeah. I feel
Mm.
like they're non existent basically. I look back at my rites of passages and yeah, there was like, I turned 18 and I got absolutely smashed. I turned 21, I got absolutely smashed. And it's
Mm-hmm.
like, what? Like, that's your rite of passage. Like, how much of a beating can my liver take? Like, that's
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
what is that as a rite of passage? Yeah. Like, there's that whole, and then I look back at kind of listening to your story, especially the way you shared it. It was very like what was present for me in your sharing was actually even reflecting on the similarities between my university experience and struggling with depression for 6 years and then popping out on the other side. And, I say I struggled with depression for 6 years, but in that process, like it was me not being able to show up authentically as myself and not too dissimilar to yourself, like built an identity around things that weren't the highest calling for me. And in fact, they were like self sabotaging in many ways, right? And that's that depression versus expression. Now, I found, because you use this word, right? You use this word vehicle around the podcast,
Mm.
which I also, if I look deep inside, and I've said this a couple of times before, but I felt like I suffered from this thing that I called savior syndrome. Yeah. Maybe I grew up Indian or in India they have gurus or something. I was just like, someone was going to come along and change my life for the better forever. Yeah. There was
Mm.
this like idea. And then I started looking into rites of passages and it's actually like, actually, you're meant to change your life for the better, for good, forever
Mm.
at these particular points in your life, right? Like you go through these rites of passages and, we sort of dressed them up in these pretty tutus now and they're like these really fluffy sort of rite of passages we've got, but they used to be quite intense to the point where like you couldn't go from like being like a teenager to an adult or like a young man to an adult without actually having proven that you are worthy of
Yeah,
adulthood in many ways,
yeah.
right? And I've been feeling into what you're sharing and reflecting on it as for myself as you're sharing it and recognizing that in the absence of these rites of passages, and especially the mental construct of the world that we live in now, showing up, like even going through the sort of liver bashing sort of days that we've gone through, right? But then also reflecting on, okay, the courage that it takes to emerge on the other side of that and deconstructing your whole identity to step
Mm.
into like, whoa, like this is the next thing that's emerging. And as I'm emerging, I'm going to be sharing because like what else other way is there? Otherwise, I'm just going to be left in this sort of past, like the skin of the snake is not going to be shared as I'm moving into this process. What is your sentiment around, or what are your thoughts around rites of passage and potentially, because this is what you said, the podcast is a vehicle for personal development, and I feel like there is so much in there for I don't want to say young men tuning in, but part of me previously I was a bit more egalitarian with my languaging, but I recently saw my wife give birth.
Mm.
And bro, they go through a rite of passage. Like
Oh shit.
holy
Yeah, I can
snap, man.
imagine.
They
I
go
can
through a rite
imagine.
of passage. Like just being in her presence as she went through that was a rite of passage for me. Yeah.
Hmm.
Um, but it's like motherhood, birthing is a whole rite of passage. But I think men, we've been stripped of them in many ways. Your thoughts?
Hmm. Yeah. I feel that, in order to emerge on the other side and, find those like proverbial like treasures that you're looking for, you have to go in the cave.
Mm,
Like you have to go in the darkness. And,
mm,
I have this sort of like spiritual therapist that we do we do therapy, and we walk through things that are going on in my life, on a regular basis. And she told me very clearly, once, she's like, look, like, you came to this world to work with light,
Mm,
and you're gonna attract people that are also working with light, but every so often you're gonna attract darkness, because that's the nature of reality.
mm,
There is always darkness when you're in light, and there's always light when you're in darkness,
mhm,
and you can't have one without the other. And I feel that in terms of going into the next chapter in our life, there has to be a sort of part of ourselves that has to die.
mhm,
Or I don't want to use the word death, because it can get, it can have a misconception, but there has to be a part of us that has to transform, like that process of alchemy.
mhm,
Like, if you're gonna go into adulthood necessarily, like, I wasn't given like a quote unquote rite of passage, but I feel life has given me the rite of passage that I need in the moment. And
mm,
I think it could be very cool to see in society, like, as certain religions have like a bar mitzvah, or certain religions have other things to initiate you, or like a college graduation. For
mm.
example, I graduated uh, in my house on my own in front of a computer screen because of this lockdown. So now, I'm actually just sharing a bit more personally. I'm applying to master's degrees, because I feel like my relationship with university was not closed, and that
Mm,
chapter in my life didn't have a nice ending. And I learned from that, actually, that you have to celebrate the big achievements and moments in your
mhm,
life, because if you don't do that, you're not closing the loop. And I'll give an example. Like, after that college experience, like, I was kind of, my parents were, in a different place in the world, and it was very emotional for them because they weren't with me on that day.
mm.
And another, like, one of, I say, like, to date, a huge achievement in my life has been attracting and manifesting a interview with one of my biggest teachers, Joe Dispenza.
Yo.
And that whole thing happened, and it's a crazy story in and of itself.
Mm,
But when I released that, a couple days before that, I had edited everything, like, it
mm.
was ready to go. It was ready to be out in
Polished.
the world, and it
Yeah.
was polished. And we actually, it took like 5 or 6 months to release that episode. So, um, because I was transitioning to another show and
Mm,
leaving something else behind, and it was just this whole like process. And that moment in my life which was literally only like 5 months ago, was probably the biggest initiation to, like, all right, you're ready for a next chapter. And a couple days before releasing that episode, I was like, something does not feel right.
mm,
Something does not feel right. Like, you literally, you have in the palm, in your hard drive, you know one of the interviews that you've been wanting to do since you started this journey, and it's
mm,
there. You
mm,
have it.
mm,
Why is something feel off?
mm,
And I started looking into it, and I actually came across this quote kind of thing that, if I were to ask you, is it about the journey or the destination, what would you
mm.
say?
I've learned over time that it's about the journey, and I still coach myself every day to sort of focus on the
Uh-huh.
journey, but it's the destination that the ego loves to be pulled along with.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. Yeah.
And when I heard that question, I would say, I answered the exact same thing.
Mm,
And I was watching, it was during an interview that I heard this, and the person goes, it's neither.
mm.
It's the company. And I was like, oh shit. Like, it doesn't matter. Like, doesn't matter if, your destination is to become the world's most successful speaker, podcaster, author in the world. If you're alone doing it, what's the point?
Yo.
So I literally opened up my phone and I created a group called Dr. Joe Premiere. And I just invited like the 15 people closest to me in that moment of my life. And I actually told my mom, like, I want to make a special thing. Like, some of my friends were working, so they arrived in suits, which was funny because, like, they came after work, and it just felt like very formal.
Mm.
We had like food, drinks, and like we just celebrated and we
Mm.
watched the episode together. And that
Yeah.
was one of the most powerful things that actually made me close the loop on that the whole process. It was
Mm.
like now it came together.
Yeah.
Now it came full circle. Like you did the hard work, you reached out, you
Mm.
made it happen. You did the back end stuff like editing and all that stuff. But then closing the loop, it's like the actual,
Mhm.
I would call it a rite of passage. Like you're
Yeah.
doing this with people around you that
Mhm.
are supporting you in kind of lifting you up into your next evolution.
Mm. Can I ask you about the pain of losing friends along the journey on your evolution?
It's hard. It's very tough. I believe that in a way, it's our egos that want to like attach and like because there's certain people in your life that remind you of who you are
Mm.
and remind you of who you've always been in the past. Like you can get together with, your childhood friend and immediately you're like that same kid again.
Mm.
And it happened to me because I had to travel to California to do this interview.
Mm.
And since I lived, I grew up in California. I was living there for 9 years. I hit up one of my best friends. We were basketball teammates. We made music together. We hung
Mm.
out literally every single day when we were like early teenagers.
Mhm.
And I hit him up, and we're both on different, paths, and
Yeah.
we kind of converged because it was really interesting to see how I differentiate between like you have some people in your life that are there for some period of time.
Mm.
You have some people that are there to teach you a lesson. But then you have what a lot of, these spiritual books call your like soul connections, your
Mm.
soul group, like those souls that you guys, when you were writing the contract to incarnate on earth, you're like, hey, you want to come in during this period of humanity? Let's do it. You sign up with them, and it's like you're gonna meet in this lifetime regardless, because
Mm.
you signed a contract, a
Mm.
soul contract, to come together
Mm.
and support each other in different ways. I see it like that. I know it might be a belief system that not a lot of people agree with, but it's cool to know that there is certain people in your life that remind you of who you are,
Mhm.
but not in the way that it's, looking to the past. It's
Mm.
people that remind you who you are becoming in the
Mhm.
process.
Mhm.
And the people that remind you who you were in the past, and if your intention is to change and your intention is to become someone new, then ultimately the people that remind you of who you used to be, if they're not on board with who you're becoming, then it's sad to say, but they have to step out of the bus because you're going
Mm.
somewhere else.
It's
And it
interesting.
sounds
Sorry.
very, yeah, sorry, it sounds very direct to say like that, but it's
Yeah.
true.
Takes a lot of conviction. I hear courage rearing its head again in the conversation, because it takes a lot of conviction to know that your bus is going where you want it to go. And I think the key reason I asked that question is because we're so susceptible, especially at younger ages. Like, and I feel like when we get along a little bit, um, especially when I look at, some of my mentors, like they've been on this path a minute, yeah, and they're like sort of set in their ways. They know who they are, they're
Mm.
devoted, and that's just what they do,
Yeah,
Whereas,
yeah,
like, when you're younger, it's like, yeah, I can feel the call to devotion, and then you look around, it's like, but I also kind of feel like going out and getting smashed would be all right as well. So what is like, it's this real, and
yeah.
and then depending on what you surround yourself with, is this whole, yeah. So brother, your inspiration, like what is your vision for, like, I can feel when I tune into you, and this is me putting words in your mouth again. I should probably stop doing that. What
No
do you feel
worries.
for the next generation? Like, what is it that you would like to see in the world? What is your vision for an inspired evolution? I'll put it that way, might be easiest. Yeah.
Hmm. I won't say it lightly when, and a lot of the spiritual teachers that we share and the mentors that we've interviewed and things like that, they're saying the same thing. And this is by far one of the greatest awakenings in human
Mm.
history, recorded human history. And there's gonna be um, certain generations that have to inherit the breaking down of the old paradigms, and they're gonna have to take it all in, and ask themselves, what do we want to create with this? Are we gonna discard it? Are we gonna build on it? Are we gonna make it better? Are we gonna create something new? Like, there's nothing set that says the young generations are gonna save the world, because again, that's the savior mentality, right?
Mm.
We can't depend on the youth, but we can kind of support and build a community that, I think, without, and this is the difference between like old people and elders.
Mm.
You know, elders, are people like the Bruce Liptons, the Joe Dispenzas of the world, that they're they've acquired so much wisdom in their lifetime, and they're able to like express it in a certain way that kind of leaves you with your jaw dropped
Mhm.
when they go on their riffs and their like speeches, monologues, and they're just like dropping these bombs on you, and it activates, I think, not only like opens your mind, but it's unlocking a certain part of your DNA that has been dormant for so long. And I think, I mean, my vision with the vehicle that is being constructed, I would say even through me, uh, is sort of acting as a bridge between this wisdom and experiences and just all this accumulation of, you know, how can we become more evolved humans, and
Mm.
bridging that with the people that will eventually end up inheriting and creating the new paradigms in the world. And I see a lot of people that are awakening more and more, and in my generation, which is really really fascinating to see. Like, some people that used to not really be curious about what I was, into, now it's like, hey, can you recommend me a book? Or
Mm.
now it's like, hey, I listened to your show, like, really 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 eye-opening conversation.
Mm.
And people are more open to it, and I think that's part of this collective awakening. But I see a lot of these leaders, they know the significance of what's going on, and they know how important it is that we can't just ignore the youth, and let them figure it out on their own. Like, I
Mm.
think we've depended for so long on institutions like universities and religions to show us how to live and show us, what are the things that we should be learning.
Mm.
But it's a whole new level of free will now that we've opened the gates to unlimited information.
Mm.
So, you could be on TikTok for 3 hours, and watch videos that aren't going to nourish you at all. Maybe even make you even more numb than you
You
were before
started off in.
watching them.
Yeah.
And there's also content and things that you can do for yourself that will accelerate your growth, and taking on growth as a necessity, not something like, oh yeah, I'll take this course because I want to like just grow the way, I do my finances, or I want to grow in my relationships. Like, that has been seen like as a luxury for so long, but I think now it's like a big necessity that, like, collectively we have to focus on upgrading, who we're becoming as humans, because people like Greg Braden and people like that are showing us the new science, and they're
Mm.
like, hey, this is your potential as these unlimited beings that are on this planet, that are capable of things that you wouldn't even imagine. Like, we talked a little bit about intuition
Mm.
and like this inner pull, like that's a sixth sense in a way. That's not
Mm.
something that's, ruled by the five senses. That's something beyond the material reality that we're used to like living on day to day. So yeah, I think to answer your question, it's, you know empowering people and individuals, not only the youth, because when you empower someone that, let's say an adult, and they're empowered to raise their kids that way. So
Mm.
you're going to have a whole new generation of conscious parents, Dr. Shafali,
Mm.
that are uh, raising a new human, a new
Mm.
generation that's going to think in different ways and process and solve problems in different ways and act in different ways and make choices in different ways. So it's going to
Yeah.
be, yeah, really interesting.
It's exciting.
It
I'm
is.
forever
It
the
is.
optimist, so I'm excited by it. Yeah, man. So tuning into some of the key things that I'm taking away from our conversation today: meditation, definitely in the toolkit. Self-awareness, big part of the recipe. Showing up with courage is a big thing that I'm taking away, and
Mm,
like subsidiary to that, I'm hearing a lot about conviction and just knowing that if it's in your path and your heart says it, like follow it with some courage. Um, what are your what are you hoping the audience to sort of take away as part of the key like key bits of actionable wisdom that have actually dropped in on your journey? Like, the self-awareness piece has been huge, the courage piece has been huge. Are those
mm.
the key left and right hook, or are there are a few things in there that you'd love to sort of leave the listener with as sort of, the the quintessential sort of Emilio's guide to, the spiritual journey in the 3D. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, every single podcast that I've created has had a philosophy behind it, and it's
Mm.
always been the same philosophy. Like the name might change slightly on the show, but it's always the same essence.
Mm.
And I learned when, I had this rock bottom in college that whenever you go within yourself and you're open and you have that courage to explore who you are and look at the aspects of yourself that you're afraid to look at,
Mm.
when you go within yourself, you start noticing how the external world is a direct reflection of that inner work or inner world that you're dealing with.
Mm.
So the show being like just tap in, what it means is like look within, go like literally tap in whenever you're going through, an issue in your life, relationship crisis, you're,
Mm.
I don't know, bankrupt and you want to shift careers and things like that, then look within of to who or what aspect of what frightened part of your personality created that,
Mhm.
and how can you transmute that, alchemize it into something that will allow your external world to change. I've had so many experiences in my life of problems that I thought weren't going to get solved. Um, and just tuning in for a couple minutes a day and like really reflecting, contemplating just you and
Mm.
not going directly to the bottle or the joint or the sex and things like that that are gonna essentially take you away from within yourself.
Mm.
It's more of an outer thing that you're doing, and just being with yourself, like sitting with yourself, like what's going on, why did I create this? Because that's
Mm.
another thing that I'd like to leave people off is like, remember that you are creating all of this. This is,
Mm.
and Joe Dispenza calls this the hologram,
Yeah.
the Matrix. Bruce Lipton says that the Matrix is a documentary.
Mm.
Like the external world is a powerful illusion. Like it really, like it feels so real, but actually what's creating it is an essence that is very internal.
Mm.
That's moving the pieces around you in your outer world, so it reflects what has been going on inside of you. And when we realize that, like actually remember, because I think we already know that it's not really like a realization that you have in this lifetime, it's more like a remembrance of,
Mm.
oh shit, I'm creating all of this,
Mhm.
and I have the power to change any aspect of my reality that I want just by placing an intention, making choices. Like that's something that we think we lose
Yeah.
in our life. It's like, oh, I don't have the power to choose yet. You can choose at any single moment, and that choice is going to have a ripple effect, like the butterfly effect. Like, you're the choice you make now in the present moment, and it requires us to be like very aware of what's
Mm.
going on.
Yeah.
in our reality, then we can start seeing how, like, oh, I wrote down that I wanted to create this type of relationship in my life. Oh, I wrote down that I wanted to interview this person. And all of a sudden I see it happening before my eyes. And I'm like, holy shit, like I'm creating this and also co-creating it. Because there's
Yeah.
some things that you have to learn to surrender to.
Mhm.
And there's certain experiences that are going to come, regardless of how much manifestation you think you're doing. It's like, it's all a lesson. But being that connected internally is going to help us navigate all these situations in our outer world.
Brother. Thank you so much for sharing yourself here with us today so abundantly, so openly. And one of the things that I definitely will say before I let you go, though, is similar to what you're sharing before, the difference between, I had Stephen Jenkinson on the podcast, and he said the difference between elders and olders and people just getting older versus being an elder is a two-part questionnaire that they have to answer. It's really straightforward. First question being, what did you know? And the second being, what did you do about it? Yeah. And many people know a lot of stuff, but potentially taking that action in the face of that, it will distill us from elders or elders. And yeah, man, it's really inspiring. For those that are tuning in, please do check out Emilio Ortiz. The YouTube channel is, please give it a minute, give it a subscribe, check it out. Like some of the videos there. The episode with Joe is honestly one of the best interviews that I've seen with Joe Dispenza as well, brother. And I'm not saying that lightly. It's just the depth with which you've unpacked yourself in that episode as well. To go to places with him is a real joy to witness, and really helps those that are on the transformational journey on their way as well. So please do go check that out. And man, kudos. And honestly, it just feels so good as a brother just to know that there are other people out there, like yourself, tuning in and also sharing the vibe, loving the wisdom, and just, becoming modern elders together, man. It's a real honor and a privilege to have you here today.
And I really appreciate you for doing the work that you're doing and sharing it with the world. I think it's so important, what these types of conversations can bring about, not only in you and like other people that are tuning in. Like, I'm so blessed and honored, really honored. I know you've had, some of the most powerful speakers in the world, and just being able to share that space and have this conversation with you is truly humbling. So I really appreciate it.
Of course, bro. We're the leaders of tomorrow.
Thank you so much.
Hey guys, if you enjoyed this video, give it a like, leave us a comment, and if you want to stay in tune for the new episodes launching every Monday, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video. Stay inspired to evolve.